Hi there. My name is Chris Ryan, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most important things that you can be doing for your business, which is finding a space to operate your business. And it's a surprising thing, the number of times that I have seen leases and letters of intent get really, really messed up, even when attorneys are involved. And that's why this has been a document that I've been producing that I wanted to share with you today, because this is something that keeps coming up with the commercial clients that I work with, and it can be extremely detrimental to your business if it's not handled properly. A lot of times you can even have a personal guarantee attached to it, so it's not just your business that's being affected here. This is about as big of a deal for your business as it can be, because if you don't get it right and you end up having liability or costs that you didn't expect, you might have a lot of difficulty operating your business, or you might even have trouble getting your doors open. And so that's why this is such a key aspect, is because it's one of the most important things that you can do. And it's also something that doesn't have a standard playbook. So if we look at this document that I've been producing here, a lot of it has to do with just trying to help you isolate key factors. So looking at things that are the things you can use in the negotiation of an LOI or a lease, so that you understand the fundamental principles of it, what you're really doing here from a bigger picture sort of point of view, and then also, just looking out so that you're not being taken advantage of by a landlord, which again happens way more than you might think. And so that's the idea, is to help you move ahead with more clarity around what's going on, what you should be asking for, what you should be looking for in return, and how to get to a negotiation and into a lease that works both for you and for the landlord without anybody taking on unnecessary liability or responsibility. And so, just as a disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, I'm an architect and a contractor. This is my experience that I'm passing along to you over looking at leases for 10 years or more. There's a lot of leases and LOIs that don't go anywhere, really. They just end up in negotiation. Either way, this is really a condensed version of that information that is hopefully going to be helping you. And so if we just jump into this, the biggest picture is the most important one to get clear. So if you don't have your mindset right in terms of what it is you're trying to do with your business, when you look at spaces, they're not going to look very good. You're going to see problems, not opportunities. You want to be seeing the issues that might be things that you may or may not be able to deal with, but looking for opportunities, having the belief and the vision that you know where you're trying to go, and the question is this space going to be capable of getting you there? It's a pretty basic thing, but this is a worksheet that we've made in conjunction with this that is really just about trying to help you understand your priorities. So for instance, is it the area or the location that is your priority, or are you better off finding cheaper rent? Is there something about the space itself that is critical to you? Is there something about the priority you might have regarding the lease? Are you going to be looking for more free rent? Are you looking for cheap rent? Are you looking for cash to be able to build out your space? And then, do you have any sort of a budget here? This is all pretty basic stuff, but it will fundamentally have a lot to do with the way that you approach looking at buildings and what you're asking for, because some landlords in every building, they're all different. And so the way that we negotiate with them and the way that you try to come to a mutually agreed upon understanding, which will be the lease, that really has to do with adjusting different dials that we'll talk about here in a minute. And so there are certain things that cannot be changed, things like the location. There are a lot of things that can be changed depending on what your budget might be. And so really everything is negotiable, but you do have to be careful with who you're dealing with, because not all landlords, just like normal people, not all of them are responsible, not all of them are honest. They might have other intentions. And so part of this process is trying to understand what's going on behind the scenes, or what the intent might be, because if you start seeing things that are red flags, which we'll also talk about in a minute, that's an indicator that you may want to be extremely careful, if not walk away. And so with that all in mind, and with your priorities sort of understood, when you find and walk a space, you fundamentally want to be very clear, and we'll jump into this right here. The thing that you're renting is generally not the building. Sometimes you might rent a whole building, but fundamentally what you're really renting most of the time is the space that is within the building. And what that means is that you don't want to be responsible for taking care of the roof. You don't want to be responsible for taking care of windows if they're broken. You don't want to be responsible if the building starts falling down. I've seen it. It happens. Buildings that look like they have issues probably have issues. Again, as straightforward as all of this sounds, it's stunning how often it gets messed up, even when you have an attorney. And then furthermore, part of what we're doing here is we're negotiating, who takes care of this giant pile of snow, if that shows up. And so that's really what's going on here during this walk as you're walking through the space and as you're trying to find a space and set the initial terms for your LOI. And so the goal here is to be defining a clear-ish line that separates the landlord's responsibilities from yours. It separates their asset, which is the building, from your space where you will be doing your tenant improvement. It's gray because there almost inevitably are overlapping areas. It's not very complicated, but there's a lot of complexity in the detail. So at the biggest, the highest level, that's the thing that's most important, because even that can get screwed up. And so say that you're walking a space. Let's assume that you found something that you may have found it on the internet. It may have been brought to you by a friend or a colleague, whatever the case is. But when you're walking a space, there are a lot of different things you can be doing and questions you can be asking. And so this checklist is actually intended to help you with that. This is something that you can get from the website, and it has basic things like location and size and height, but it also really has these triggers which are intended to help prompt you or remind you to look and ask different questions. Things like the general condition of the building. What do you see? Do you see damage? Do you see water damage? Do you see cracks? What do you see? The roof, the walls, the structure, doors and windows and glass. Does it have sprinklers? What does the air conditioning system look like? Does it have restrooms that work? Things like, are there dedicated parking spaces? Is there a signage issue that you need to deal with? Things like that can really start helping you understand how this building either may or may not work for you. Further, the more you can understand about any known work that the landlord is saying, yes, we know we need to do that, that again is stuff that you need to really document, because you don't want them to say, yes, we know we're going to fix that, and then have them not write it in the lease and have them not do it. Again, it happens a lot. So that's all stuff that you can just make notes of and document along the way. Further, asking if there are existing drawings or permits or surveys is always a good thing to do, and we'll talk about why that's sort of limited in terms of its use, but it's always good if you can get it. Further, things like accessibility, which this gets into certain red flags. Accessibility into a building. If you're a public building, meaning you're going to have customers coming in, it's important to make sure they can get in without having to use stairs. So is there a ramp? Is there an elevator inside? What's the condition of the stairs? Things like that. As you move forward, and as you're talking with the realtor or the landlord or whoever's showing you the building, you can also look at things like, are there terms in the lease that they're looking for? For instance, are they trying to rent it very quickly? Are they renting it at a high dollar per square foot? Are they willing to give you a lot of tenant improvement money or a long free rent period? Whatever the case might be, this is just a place to try to collect your different ideas and different thoughts as you're actually walking a site. And so, one note on the general overall condition of buildings. New buildings can be built very poorly, and old buildings can be built very well. And so certain elements, like air conditioning systems, for instance, have a limited lifespan and they can break or just stop working. But buildings, it's not so much about their age as much as their condition, because I've seen a lot of very new buildings that actually are quite, just way worse than a much older building. And so if we jump back over here into the letter of intent, if you like the building and you want to move forward investigating it as a possibility, an LOI is a non-binding but good faith agreement that you can set prior to moving into an official lease negotiation. It's saying that you and the landlord are looking to move forward in good faith, and it's an opportunity for you to do a lot more research that we're going to get into right now. So typically they're pretty short. It's something that your realtor often will be the one who writes this up. A few pages, there's no money exchanged, but it sets an LOI period where you are able to do a lot of the work that is critical for getting a lease signed. So when we talk about negotiating an LOI or a lease, there are different things that can come into play. So the dials that I usually look at are things like the rental rate, free rent, tenant improvement allowance, basically cash for your work, and then landlord work. And so again, different people have different priorities. Different businesses, different states of maturity have different priorities. You may have cash, you may have no cash. Same for the landlord. So the rental rate is a big one because that's just the sort of dollar per square foot. The free rent period is also one that can be critical for opening your business while you aren't paying rent. And then getting cash for your fit out. If you're a new business, that might be key, but the landlord may be very reluctant to give it to you. And so if you're asking for landlord work, which is the fourth dial that I've listed here, that can be tricky because if you're asking them to do something on your behalf that is above and beyond what they would be doing for a normal or another tenant, you just have to be very careful with what they're delivering, the quality, things like that, because you may not have the same priorities. And so as you're getting into an LOI, there's a variety of different terms and different things that will be needed. And so, your company name, a guarantor, which could be a personal guarantee, and that's again why this is starting to get very serious. Different things about the term, options, turnover, a targeted turnover date, which really should be a milestone more than an actual date. They're turning it over to you when the work is done. There should be a goal for what the date is, but very often, you want them to finish the work. And if there is work that is being done after you take it, again, make sure you add an addendum or an amendment to the contract that says that, basically, so that it's tracked. And then, of course, things like the rent, how much you're paying in other fees, insurance, whatever, the rent commencement. And then, of course, what are you even looking to do in the space? You want to list this out so that there's no sort of bait and switch on anybody's part. You want to state it very clearly what it is that you intend to do. And as you get further in the process, you want to make sure that you're allowed to do what you want to do without having to get a variance, or if you do need to get a variance, at the very least, you want to know about it. And so, again, this just keeps listing out a bunch of different things that will be covered, tenant allowance, what is the landlord responsible for, what is the tenant responsible for, different utilities, how is that broken up, things like parking, and then different disclosures. And so during this window, if you have an LOI signed, that is a higher degree of comfort that you're moving forward. And since there's not any money exchanging hands, it's a good time to invest money on your side to really understand what's going on. And so it's very important to not cheap out in this phase, because if you do, you may find something that's very, very detrimental once a lease is signed. And then it's going to be really hard to get out of it, because once a lease is signed, again, it's just not as easy as right now to negotiate these things. And so some of the things that you can do right now, which are generally a really good idea, would be to bring in different professionals, both architects, engineers, contractors, whoever might be able to help you understand what it is you're looking at. They all have a different perspective, and hopefully they're all able to help you have a more clear understanding. Again, the goal with all of this is clarity. It's really trying to understand what's going on and to be able to see through any sort of noise or distraction. And so bringing in professionals, whether it's free or whether they charge you a little bit of money, is very, very smart. Another thing to do that is very smart would be to be testing if your business works in the space you're talking about. So test fits are very common for most development groups, and it's a way to align your business model and what it might actually be from a layout point of view to make sure that they actually work well enough. You don't want to realize, oh, we actually can't even come close to doing what we want to do. or that the ceiling is too low, or whatever the case might be, now's the time to do it. Even if you have to invest a little bit of money, it can be a very smart investment because you don't want to figure that out after you have a lease signed, and it's going to be very, very hard to get out of. So now is a really good time and a very appropriate time, especially as you're getting closer to a lease. And so the more certainty you have around signing a lease, you can also do other things like scanning the space with a 3D scanner. The reason why that's important is because any drawings that you get from the landlord, they are going to most likely say, we're not responsible for these. You can have them, do what you want with them, we take no responsibility. Having a scan, which can be expensive, is really critical because it gives you something where your professionals can work off of when they're doing the drawings and the design work for you. So the more certainty you have that you're going to sign a lease, the more it's, you're comfortable investing a little bit more money. Again, this is relatively modest compared to the multiple of investment you have to put in to produce permit drawings, and then the bigger multiple to do the actual construction of the project. And so again, it's a smart way to look at it up front with the value of that investment. It also can be used, frankly, to help you with things like funding, raising money for your business. So there's a lot of different reasons why this can all work together. But this is all stuff that you can be doing as the LOI is being sort of in that process and the lease is being discussed. And so I already went over some of this, but as you're walking a building, some of the red flags to look for are things like the building shell, meaning the roof, the walls, the floor. You don't want to be responsible for that unless you're okay with that. And what I mean is that there are certain situations where you might accept that responsibility. Maybe the building is just so cheap that you're okay with fixing some of it. Maybe it's just not that big of a deal, but again, I'd want to check that with an engineer probably. And so you don't want to be taking responsibility for their asset unless you're aware of it. And that's the biggest thing, is you can do whatever you want, but you just want to not have any surprises down the road that hit your pocketbook really hard. And so other things that are big red flags notoriously, accessibility, just the ADA, there's all sorts of rules around that. Elevators, who owns the elevator? Are you responsible for maintaining it every year? Things like that. Stairs, sprinklers, different items. And then down here, I'm getting into different definitions that can be useful that will show up occasionally in different versions of LOIs and leases. So these are just different definitions that are intended to help you understand what's going on so that you're using the right and the specific terminology that's appropriate for the situation that you're in. And so we can just sort of scroll through this. And this brings us to what the exhibits would be. And so in addition to the 2 or 3 page LOI that you're going to be working on, that sort of is a Word document that is spelling out the general terms, an exhibit would be something like a description of the premises where you're really just defining what space you're getting. It might even just be a plan that has highlighter on it or something like that. It can be pretty basic. But one of the things that is also good about having an accurate drawing of a building is you can verify if that square footage count is actually accurate, because generally you're billed dollar per square foot. And again, the time to figure it out is before you have a lease signed, because that's when there's at least more leverage than once a signed lease is executed. And then a big one here is the landlord work letter, which is defining what the landlord will do for you before you take possession of the building. And that can be both things that are required by code. It can also be things that you just request and negotiate. But the biggest thing is that you don't want to accept the space or the building until that work is done. Or if you are accepting it, make sure that you document the things that are not done and that they will be done. This stuff can linger, it can become a real problem, and it can become something that you just don't want to deal with. And so some of the other sections and terms that would be in a work letter, an as-is situation is just like any other real estate. You might accept it as is for a variety of reasons. It's just a little more risky. A demised space, this is a basic one. Your space needs to be separated from your neighbor if you have a shared wall. it needs to be done the right way. It means it has to have the right fire rating. It has to be sealed the right way. It is shocking how often that is not the case. People renting spaces that are legally not demised. So just a couple little sentences in your LOI and in your lease can protect you. And my fundamental position is that writing a list of every single thing that you're concerned about is very difficult because there's always going to be something else. But if you set the intent, meaning we need a demised space, that is pretty much going to cover a lot of different issues, whether it's not enough drywall to get the fire rating you need, or a sprinkler pipe is penetrating the wall in a way that ruins the demising wall. My point is, landlords that point to very specific items, they're often looking at the forest, not for the forest, but for the one tree, and often it can even be sort of a distracting technique. So you just have to be careful to not look at one thing without seeing the entirety of the problem that you're actually working on. So other things that are listed here, interior walls, restrooms, things like that. And so again, this is really just intended to be a guide to help you get from where you are today to getting your business open. There's a lot of big issues that need to be navigated in between, and I hope this is a helpful thing for you. So I really do appreciate you spending your time with me. Thank you for watching, and please reach out if I can help you with anything. Take care.